naman siya eh. Nay, baka kasi pag binuksan natin, umalis siya. Kaya lang, hindi daw siya makahinga sa loob eh. Diyan ka na lang, Nay. Upo ka na lang. Papaypayan ka nila.
Alright, so what you just heard is a Lola trapped inside a van with a window that's slightly open. The Lola sweating profusely, trying to get out, asking for help from everyone around her since it's in a public parking space. And all these passerbys are greatly affected seeing this distraught Lola. And if so, the question is, if you were a passerby, would you be the hero and break the glass of the car, or would you try to give her water? What are your thoughts on this? What if you were a passerby?
So mahirap yan, Martha. I mean, it seems that I'm surprised that there's even a question among the group, whether to help or not, no. But most likely there was like a context for, like I heard, no, sabi parang baka mapagbintangan ako. So laging merong ganun na nakasama sa tinatanong natin kung tutulong tayo. Baka meron loloko ba diyan o meron bang mangyayari sa akin. But I think the question of needing to help is sometimes the obvious answer is yes, if somebody is in need, let's help. But obviously, it seems that it's not the simple answer to that question because people often ask, anong consequence niyan? Will I get into trouble? Baka lokohin lang ako nito.
Scam ba yan?
Yeah, scam ba yan? Di ba? And so, I think that's part of what makes this question seemingly a simple question of, yes, of course, let's help. But obviously, in the story, the crowd seemed to hesitate.
I agree. No, it should actually be very simple. It should actually be not complicated at all because I mean, obviously she's looking for help, diba? And people are there, they can help without something happening to them.
Right.
But right now, sa parang ganon, no, yung pag makakita ka ng ganon, you'll think, is it as simple as that? Yung nga, sabi natin kanina, baka scam, o di kaya, will there be legal implications? Paano kung nakalock yung pinto at sirain ko? Mahabla ba ako? Baka mapagkamalan ako na carnapper, baka mapagkamalan ako yung gumawa, right?
True.
So I think those things run through your head, natural. And it's sad, actually. It's very sad and it's regrettable that when we see something like that, honestly, that runs through your thoughts, di ba? Ako mismo, I mean, honestly, if I were in that situation and I see something like that, my first instinct really would be to ask, is this for real? Diba? I mean, that's really unfortunate, but I think that would be my human reaction. Is this for real? Totoo ba to na someone would lock the Lola in a car with just a little bit of space? Even that, I would probably doubt. Kasi kung talagang masama intensyon niya, dapat sinara yung pinto, yung window, di ba? Bakit nag-iwan pa ng konti na magsalita pa yung Lola? Ano ba yan? Yun ba yung bitag para makapasok ka tapos biglang isa-scam ka ba? So, I mean, di ba? It's really unfortunate, but we're humans, right? And so we think of that. We think of the worst when we see a simple situation like that. We think of the worst, unfortunately.
And mentioning that there was a crowd, no, I think the tendency is sila na lang tutulong. Baka sila tumulong.
That's true.
Yeah.
And so you kind of wait for people to do something. And sometimes the gut reaction is, iba naman tutulong eh.
Crowd mentality.
A crowd mentality. And then you end up nobody even wanting to help, I think. So that's seemingly a simple question that we need to help those who are asking for help. But it seems the situation, people's reaction makes it a little bit more complicated. So it's a good discussion, right?
Right.
Yeah.
When you think it would be a no-brainer, ito yung mga tanong na in emergency situations, would you fight or would you flee, diba?
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Lex Dei, where we ask tough questions and we get real answers.
I'm Martha from Christ Youth in Action. It's a youth outreach from Ligaya ng Panginoon. And with me today again, is Attorney Ted Te, a human rights lawyer and faculty member of 3 law schools here in the Philippines, and Raoul Roncal, a theologian and instructor.
And for those who have not seen our previous episodes, do subscribe to the Lex Dei Podcast on Spotify. You may also visit the Lex Dei Podcast Facebook page or the Christ Youth in Action YouTube account.
We are on a 6th episode, and we would like to invite you to look at these ideas, these truths, with the lens of Lex, the Constitution, the law of the land. But also, we want to look at it from the perspective of Dei, of God. And maybe we could understand this in a better way by looking at it from the perspective of church teachings. Sit back and relax and enjoy this episode.
And Raul, this episode is about Good Samaritans. And I'd like to open or continue the conversation which we had earlier by thanking the segment of our society who have really gone above and beyond the call of duty during this time of the pandemic. But we know them as frontliners. They're in many fields: the medical field, the public health field, even those in the production line. Those who make sure that we have our toilet paper, our food, our canned goods. Those who deliver our food when we cannot go out because of the quarantine restrictions. They're our frontliners.
Yeah. And sa akin, Ted, what's inspiring for me is because of the pandemic situation. I mean, we've always known that there are doctors doing their job, nurses that take care of us in the hospital, and these people, as you mentioned, in the production line. But because of the pandemic, there's this added component of, wow, they're really risking their lives. I don't know if you heard about the story of this doctor. He's the head of Rizal Medical and Lito Sacrilayan. And he was COVID positive, and he actually even reached the ICU. They took care of him. He recovered, went home. I think he had all the right to stay home. But when he got well, he went back. And he went back to help. And if you ask him why he did it, because he said he needed to do his job. And so that's inspiring, that people are willing to help, even at the point of risking their lives.
Yeah, and there are a lot of stories like that, Raul. Lots of people who have really gone out of their comfort zones. For example, people who drive for others who don't have, their own mode of transportation. People who raise funds during the time of COVID, right? They're all helping.
And people really who don't have a lot, but they continue to give. You'd probably think that they're not the right people. Maybe you'd say dapat yung mga mayaman yung mas nag-e-effort, diba? But we see these ordinary people really working together, yung bayanihan nga, diba? To give them rides, medical frontliners walking to hospitals, how many kilometers, right? And just recently, the news of the Pinay nurse in the UK who was suffering from severe COVID. And even in her last moment, she kept saying she still wants to help. She still wants to do so much. And it's just amazing. Sana all, the term that they say now. Sana all.
Totoo.
As we see these great examples, and really I'm at awe at people who continue to press on even if pagod na talaga sila.
Yeah, totoo yan.
So heartlessly being great examples of the Good Samaritan. And we really want to thank them. And with the question that I just brought, that we were talking about earlier, the question is now, as ordinary citizens, taking example from these amazing people, the dilemma is now, do we help or not help? Because there's still a present danger. There's still COVID. Mag-go 1 year na tayong COVID. And as we saw the conversation that the crowd had with the Lola, baka may mangyari sa akin, gagawin ko ba? Hindi ko ba gagawin? And that's the viral video that we just heard in the intro about the Lola stuck in a car with the window slightly open. With the heat of the Philippines, I'm sure it wasn't.
Yeah.
It was really
Yes.
brought her to be distressed, diba?
Mm.
What if it's something like that that's so urgent? Can we help or should we not with COVID? What if they're not wearing a mask, diba? Paano na yun?
Yeah.
Do we risk it?
And what are the
and
consequences if
yeah.
we help or don't help?
Right.
And that's true. And sometimes even we might have a tendency to judge those who won't help.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
because, sama naman ito mga to, hindi sila tumutulong. But at the same time, we have to judge in the sense of make a judgment on how are we supposed to behave in these very difficult times where we would find ourselves always faced with the possibility of helping somebody in need. And we just began by saying that obviously there are people who are even making big sacrifices just to help.
Yeah.
But still, it begs the question, why is it sometimes difficult to even consider helping? What's behind our fear of going beyond ourselves to help? Maybe people are just, as you mentioned a while ago, Ted, are afraid of the consequences. Meron bang law against dyan? Ano ba yan? Kailangan bang bantayan yung sarili natin? Is there a law that requires us to help? Am I afraid that pag hindi ako tumulong, makulong ba ako? Meron bang ganun?
Is there a law that penalizes me if I don't help? In the situation we gave, the Lola, di ba? Or is there a law that mandates that I should help, I should come in, di ba? So to help or not to help. But siguro before I talk about the law on this matter, earlier I said I have to be honest and say in a situation like that, I would also, second guess myself. I would probably, knowing myself, I'm usually very conscious of my security, of my health, right? So I find myself in ordinary times, pre-COVID, when I'm at an intersection, someone knocks on my window, asks for alms, right? I would always think, scam siguro to, scam to, kaya humingi ng pera. And sometimes I provoke the situation by giving food instead of coins.
Right.
Oh.
So para sabi ko, para hindi siya, hindi matupad yung scam. But it becomes even more difficult because of COVID, di ba? Because if someone knocks on my window in the car and they don't have a mask, they don't have gloves, and obviously there's a very high risk of contamination if I open the window and I give money, even if I want to help, right? So I have to think, anong mas importante sa akin doon? Baka magkasakit ako or makatulong ako, di ba? And so that's one thing actually that the law tells us. There is actually a very specific provision of law, and it's in the Revised Penal Code, Article 275. And actually, I tell my students that this is what I call the Good Samaritan law. It's called abandonment of persons in danger and abandonment of one's victim.
Yes.
It punishes anyone who fails to render assistance to any person whom he or she shall find in an uninhabited place, meaning a place where there's very little help that can be obtained, wounded or in danger of dying, when the person who finds the other person can render the assistance without detriment to himself. And then the second situation is it punishes anyone who accidentally hits someone and leaves that person without giving assistance. And finally, yung third, and this is also something we can relate to, it punishes one who, having found an abandoned child under 7 years of age and fails to deliver the child to the authorities, to the child's family, or to take the child to a safe place. Many times we see, diba, kids, very young kids, carrying a smaller kid, a younger kid, right? Begging on the street, diba? So definitely below 7 yun. So anong gagawin ko? Lalabas ako sa kotse ko, isasakay ko sila sa kotse, dadaling ko sila sa DSWD. Diba? So, you would think, sandali, ano kaya to? Again, scam ba to? Magkakaroon ba ako ng COVID? Ma-infect ba ako? Diba? But the law tells us, if you if you can help without detriment to yourself, then
Yeah.
you should. Because otherwise you get punished. And imprisonment yung imprisonment yung penalty.
Grabe.
Pwede kang kasuhan.
Oh.
It's a criminal offense. It's a criminal
Ah.
offense.
So, I think the important context, Ted, is the person is in need of help. Like, for example, they
Yes.
gave a list as best as they could of people who are in dire need, no? Especially,
Yes.
the example of the baby, no?
Mm-mm.
The age of a child, no? So it's
Yeah.
obvious that there's a law stating the obvious. Stating the obvious.
Yes, and-
if you're capable
and-
of helping,
Help.
you should help.
without being injured yourself, na hindi ka masasaktan,
yeah,
that
yeah.
you will not
Yes.
suffer. You will not suffer, di ba?
Actually, yun yung
So,
tanong ko, diba? Like, what about self-preservation? Or,
Right.
yun nga, diba?
Right.
What if it's a scam? I just want to protect myself. Why endanger
Correct.
two
Yeah.
people? Diba? When you can, I don't know, do something less heroic and maybe like behind the scenes, call the police or something.
Mm.
If they're as responsive, mga ganun.
And those are common questions, diba? If you begin asking, can I help? Should I help? And is it the right time to help? Am I the right person to help?
Exactly.
Those are the things that
Correct.
I think,
correct.
Martha, you are mentioning, right? And so,
Mm.
but the interesting perspective that I get, especially if you look at what's in the scriptures, they don't give you a context. They don't give you these are the things that obviously you should do and obviously you should, but they give us a particular perspective by giving certain narratives. Like Pope Francis does a good job. Recently, he had this encyclical wherein he was talking about that we are brothers and sisters. No? And he ends this encyclical, talks about the need to help the world and be conscious about what's happening in the world, with sort of two narratives in the Bible: the Cain and Abel story, which is an extreme story, a brother killing his own brother. It's like the worst example at the beginning of the story of the Bible of something that you won't do. A family member does not kill another family member, but that's the point of the story. It's how bad we can be. And the question that was given when God, so where is your brother Abel? He was asking Cain, and Cain gave this classic answer: am I my brother's keeper? May pakailan ba ako dapat?
Mm-mm.
But the obvious answer is yes, you're your brother's
Yes.
keeper. And you did not only not care for your brother, you killed your brother. No? So again, I think that the church teaching or the perspective here is we human beings should have a understanding that we should value the life of another person. No? And we should not ask the question, am I my brother's keeper? We shouldn't ask that question, because the obvious answer is yes. And then he uses the story of the Good Samaritan, which is a classic story of two high positioned leaders of the church at the time. They did not bother to help this man in need. And of all the people, a Samaritan who was considered a sinner, a second-class Jewish citizen, because they're not totally Jewish.
Mhm.
They're part Jew, part Gentile. No? But he was the one who became the brother's keeper. He did something to help somebody in need. So the basic perspective for us Christians is kailangan tayong tumulong. Tama naman, kailangan tanungin kung ano yung konteksto, kaya ba natin tumulong? But the perspective that the church gives us, I think, is, but the first gut feel for all of us is, how can I help? Because I am my brother's keeper. We need to take care of each other. That's an important, I think, perspective that church teaching also gives us, in this area.
Definitely.
And in fact, in Article 275, the law which spoke of also, I think it's the same perspective, except that it's couched in a prohibition, right? You should not abandon someone. So
Tama.
it's a different way. It's a different way of saying it. But basically, what the law wants to do is to encourage people to get involved,
That's true.
to help when you can help. And so therefore, we do have a duty to help legally.
Yes.
Kasi otherwise, under 275, it becomes a crime if you refuse to help, if you fail to help, even when you can.
Yeah, and maybe the question is, diba, like, you'll really go into your brain and say, emergency situation ba talaga to?
Yes. Yes.
Diba? Like, what if gagawin ko to and with the point of being a lawyer is finding the loopholes. You'll question, like, you'll
Yeah.
try to, if you're the person, if you're in court, let's say you were brought to court,
Yeah.
and then your question, you'll try to bury the situation. Hindi naman talaga emergency yun. They just acted out of reason. So parang it's really trying to get out of your head. It's really simply said, right? But
Yeah.
it's so difficult to do, especially in a time when people kind of justify the need to be selfish because
Yes.
it's a pandemic and we're all
Yeah.
just trying to survive, right?
Yeah.
And I guess for both of you, from what we just talked about, it's really our call as Christians, and at the same time, we're backed up by the law. Wag na natin isipin yung repercussions
Yes.
of what the defending lawyer will say,
Yeah.
but we're backed up by the law, and it's not just because I have to be my brother's keeper, but it's just
Yeah.
out of human decency, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
If you don't even bring in the Christian perspective of the Good Samaritan, although it's a great reference for people,
Yeah.
it's just being a good human. When you see someone in distress, you help out. So we find ourselves in this situation and we want to help others. And diba, it's always like, sana if I'm in that same situation, matulungan din ako. Bakit hindi ako
Yes.
nagtulungan? Which
Exactly.
brings about yung do unto others as what others have done to you, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
maybe that's a good way to think about it na, sige, tulungan ko na lang to, and hopefully hopefully I'm not in the situation, right? But
Yeah.
when the time comes that I'm in need, someone will do the same
Yeah.
to me, right?
Yeah.
Alam mo, there's even
Yeah.
one provision in the revised penal code also, no? Picking up from what Martha mentioned, that in fact, if a person helps another avoid an evil that's being done to that person,
Yeah.
or a wrong that's about to be done, or an injury that's about to be inflicted, and the person who is helping commits a crime, okay, destroys property, for example, no?
Yeah.
It is actually a justifying circumstance.
Oh.
That person will not be liable. So the example I always give there is, let's say, a fireman, right, who responds to a fire, and then in order to get to that building, to that burning building, he has to destroy a line of cars that are illegally parked. Okay? Kailangan na sirain lahat yung mga kotseng yun. Kasi hindi siya aabot eh. Hindi niya ma-save yung tao na sa building. Kung hindi niya sisirain yung kotse. So, syempre, that's a crime, right? That's destruction of property. So, if the car owners now sue and say, sandali, sinira mo kotse ko eh, right? He can mention that it's called the state of necessity, under the law. Your car was destroyed, but this person was saved, right?
Yeah.
So, even to that point, yung repercussions na iniisip natin, what if I do something? What if makulong ako? What if makidemanda ako, right? So that's actually what we call a justifying circumstance. So even if you commit a crime, di ba, you destroy property. Si Lola, sinira mo yung bintana ng kotse para i-save si Lola, right? So dumating yung may-ari, sabi na, ba't mo sinira yung kotse ko? Right? Pagbabayaran mo yan. Under the law, he will not be liable. You would not be liable because that's called a justifying circumstance. You were trying to save the Lola.
Yeah.
Yeah, and siguro Ted, one of the things that I think is also very clear, I mean, it seems I'm happy to see that it's just common sense, that really makes sense because you're trying to help.
Yeah.
Now, siguro for the people listening to us, you might say, I should wait for that that heroic moment that I have to, help, and
Yeah.
maybe I will get into a complicated situation as described by Attorney Ted. But in the story of the Good Samaritan, what is important is Jesus built it up with the Good Samaritan was the only one who was willing to actually go and approach the man lying on the road. The others went away. So there seems to be a build-up that the important thing is even the initial step of the willingness to help. That slowly grew into generosity, because at the end of the story, parang binenta niya na lahat yung property niya para lang bayaran yung kailangan nung tao na tinulungan niya. But I think the point of the story is more like sort of a process of what happens to us. Because I think in our heroic stories of the people who are going out there, even if they're risking their lives, I think those people did small things to help. And they just kept on doing it in their life. And because of that, their ability to be generous increased. No? And I think for us, maybe the starting point is just, I'm willing to help. And let's begin there. Let's be aware of the needs of others and not be selfish. Maybe that's a good starting point to what we should take home after this this podcast that people out there are hearing. Maybe that's a starting point. Just be willing to help, be willing to care, be willing to do something good. No,
taking that step amongst the crowd, diba? Just putting yourself in front. So then the question is, how should we act in this situation? You kind of already touched on it, Raoul, but again, it's still this dilemma. I really can't. I want to be a good Catholic. I want to be a good Christian. I want to help people. Ang daming nangangailangan ngayon. But I'm stuck in the confines of my house. I don't want to just give money. Diba? So parang, how should we act in this situation? And the side of God's law or the law of God.
And I think I like the approach of Pope Francis. He first gives a perspective on our tendencies. Like one of the things that he tackled in this encyclical was the throwaway culture. Like if something is wala nang silbi, tinatapon natin. But then he was attacking also our tendency to be preoccupied with ourselves. No? Siguro, Martha, that the first thing that I would then give us an advice is, okay, let's first work on the small things. Be more conscious of others and the needs of others. Let's begin there. No, let's not wait for a heroic act yet, but let's help in whatever way we can. Baka sindikato to or whatever. Oh well, find out. But don't stop by saying sindikato lahat yan. Eh ang dami naman nakalagay doon sa Facebook ng pwede natin tulungan na legal, di ba? Na obviously na simbahan nangangailangan ng tulong. Well, give a little bit of your earnings. Start there, no? Start helping and start getting out of yourself, which I think the warning, that the tendency for us today because of the pandemic is we become preoccupied with ourselves. I myself, I fall into that. Sarili ko lang iniisip ko.
Or even in a situation, parang, di ba, for example, pandemic, ako yung una kong naisip is like, with the rise of help the jeepney drivers, help the people in payatas, or the people that don't have food to eat because they can't travel, help, all these people with the typhoon in Bicol, in Cagayan, parang, paano na kung magkakasakit ako, magkaka-COVID ako, and the bill of COVID and an ICU is like thousands of pesos. So napapaisip din ako na parang, of course, I want to be able to support my parents and I don't want them to go into that. But like, it's really such a struggle. And I think that's the perfect example from the side, from what you said, Raoul, na take it one step at a time. Huwag tayo masyadong
Yeah.
Heroic.
Ay, Martha, Ted, I would like to read to you from Fratelli Tutti.
Ano ba yung Fratelli Tutti?
Ah.
Queer. Well, it
Fratelli
sounds like
Tutti.
a
O nga, no, para
candy.
siyang, para siyang Tutti Frutti. Ako rin nagkakamali rin ako dito, Martha. But anyway, Fratelli Tutti just means all brothers and sisters. It was mentioned by Pope Francis, but actually he was quoting Francis of Assisi, no, in one of his homilies. But you might be wondering, so what's the big deal about this encyclical? Well, actually, popes write encyclicals mainly as a way of inspiring people, inspiring especially Catholics. But I think he's also inspiring everybody who's willing to listen. And so he speaks the basic teachings of the church to mainly inspire. Now, look at this. There's this one line here, kasi we've been talking about the Good Samaritan. I like this one paragraph. I will read it. I think it's a very good explanation of the kind of attitude we should have regarding this question, should we help? Let me quote it directly. Here, Pope Francis says, Jesus tells a story of a man assaulted by thieves and lying injured on the wayside. Several persons passed him by but failed to stop. These were people holding important social positions, yet lacking in their real concern for the common good. They would not waste a couple of minutes caring for the injured man, or even in calling for help. Only one person stopped, approached the man, and cared for him personally, even spending his own money to provide for his needs. He also gave him something that in a frenetic world we cling to tightly. He gave him his time. Certainly, he had his own plans for that day, his own needs, commitments, and desires. Yet he was able to put all that aside when confronted with someone in need. Without even knowing the injured man, he saw him as a deserving of his time and attention. End of quote. Inspiring, di ba? It's like Pope Francis is just giving us a simple advice. The big difference between the two people who did not help, this man, the Good Samaritan, was the one who was willing to give his time and his resources. He was the one who was willing to help. And I think that's the main point for us today. I mean, not only for Catholics or Christians, for everybody in the world, because it's so obvious when we hear people in the news helping out. We are inspired. There is something human about caring for another person.
Yeah.
And here, I think Pope Francis is also trying to bother our conscience and saying, well, the world we live in, we're just so concerned about our time for ourselves, our money for ourselves. And he's trying to counteract that tendency and say, hey, if you're willing to help, you should be willing to care enough to give your time and your resources for those in need. And I think we should listen to Pope Francis and be conscious of these things that he's pointing out to us, especially for our situation in this pandemic. We need to be more willing to be human by helping out.
Maybe the takeaway also from that, no, and answering Martha's question earlier, how should we act in the face of everything that's happening, our desire to help, but that is sometimes overcome by our own fears, maybe even our own cynicism about what we see, right? Maybe the first thing is, let's not overcomplicate things. I think that was a
True.
great passage that you quoted from Pope Francis's encyclical, no? He pointed out that the Samaritan was able to help because he gave something that was very simple, which he had, time, no? And I recall this when in the US, for example, in the subway in New York, there's this sticker that reminds people, if you see something, say something, right? If you see
Galing,
something, say something. So if you see someone in
Napakasimple.
need of help,
Oo.
you don't need to do a big thing, right? They're not expecting you to do a big thing, but say something, right? Call 911, call the police, call
Yeah.
attention to the person who needs help. Sometimes it's as easy as, is there a doctor in the house, right? So doon mag-umpisa eh. So something as simple as that. And
Yep.
it also leads me to siguro the second point, no, na if we fail to even act in the simplest of things, which is
Yes.
as simple as saying something, right? We
Yeah.
become part of the problem, eh? Right?
That's
If
true.
we already
True.
see that something's wrong, right? A crime is being committed, an evil is being done, a wrong is being perpetuated, and then we keep quiet, right? We keep quiet.
Yep.
It is as if we were part of it, right? It is
Yeah.
as if we tolerated it,
Yep.
we allowed it to happen. So in a sense, no, not legally, but maybe
Yeah.
well morally, no, we are equally guilty, right?
Yeah.
Because we're not helping, right? We are not
Yep.
part of the solution. You become part of the problem. So
Yep.
maybe again, siguro to overcome yung ating natural human tendency to say, una, natakot ako, nagdududa ako, or baka scam yan, is to do the simplest thing.
Oo,
Call,
ano?
right? Call for help. Uh, you know, speak up, speak out, no? So, for example, yung mga situations na may pinapatay,
Yeah.
right? At let's say may nakita ka, natural, you would be afraid, right?
Yeah.
To maybe say something, baka balikan ka.
Yeah.
Right? But it can be as simple as to call the
Yeah.
police or to call authorities and say, look, I want to report a crime. I want to report something that was done. And that's it, right?
Yeah.
In doing that, you're able to help, right?
Yeah.
But siguro, the thing to remember is, again, it's a great reminder, yung sinabi ni Pope Francis, that as something that you have, something that will not cost you,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Something that will not cost you. Tawag lang, or just to say, kailangan ng tulong ng taong ito, right? Instead of not doing anything, instead of just keeping quiet.
Right. And it's really parang very relevant nga yung sinabi ni Pope Francis, diba? We all have time.
Yes.
No matter what religion, no matter what political beliefs, we all have the time. And we don't want to live our lives saying na, oh, sana ginawa ko to, diba? Or sana,
Yeah.
what if it's as simple as you just stay with them, diba?
Yes.
Imagine iniwan na lahat. There's a crowd, and then I don't know, there's a hold up or something, and
Yeah.
there's a crowd, and then nag-die down na yung situation. Just stay with them, comfort them.
True.
You don't even need to give them money. Maybe just wait, stay with them, wait, and until the police arrive, or until their relative arrives, or someone that is of authority nga, as you mentioned. And I think we have to remind ourselves that why live in a situation wherein you'll say at the end of your life na sana I did more good things. When good things can be done so simply by just giving your time, or even just thinking about it, diba? Thinking about people that you don't normally think about, and reaching out to them and saying, how are you dealing with this pandemic? Or do you still have a job? Or in specific to our situation, in times of crisis, in times of emergency, just saying, are you okay? Yun lang yun, diba? Are you okay? Do you need help? Like what you said, is there a doctor in the room? So simple, and it's not. It's taking from the example of the Good Samaritan. He just approached.
Just approach. That's the first step. That's the first step that he did. Yeah.
Let's not think about magkano na bang gastos ko to, tutulungan ko yung tao to. Diba? And we should be confident. We're backed up by the law, as what Ted mentioned. We're backed up by our own morality, and what the Pope mentioned as well. It's really an encouragement to be confident to help, to be confident to approach, to be confident to just be our brother's keeper.
Yes, that's true. That's right.
Think about our neighbors instead of ourselves, right?
Yeah.
So then we want to ask the audience, as we wrap up our episode, the question is for our audience, to help or not to help? Thank you so much again, Ted and Raul. Our
Yep.
fourth episode together and our sixth
Yes.
episode in this podcast. Always,
Yeah.
I don't know how much to emphasize, but it's always a great conversation with the three of us.
Yes, Martha. Thank you very much also. The conversations here is enlightening but also a lot of fun, di ba? Tutti frutti, di ba? Kanina. But again, I'm looking forward for more conversations. Thank you very much.
I agree. Great questions, tough answers, but very real answers. And it's always, the time really flies because we're having fun.
Yes.
Right.
So thank you.
Yes, thank you again. And we hope to have you again next time here at Lex Dei Podcast, where we ask tough questions and get real answers. If you have questions on our topics, or on our all the topics that we discussed in our last 6 episodes, feel free to send us a message at Lex Dei Podcast on our Facebook page, or if you like this episode, share it with a friend. We are on the CYA YouTube page, and we are also on Lex Dei Spotify. Make sure to subscribe, follow, lahat na gawin yun. Like, subscribe, listen, and most importantly, let's continue to ask these questions. Let's continue to speak up and try to get real answers. Thank you.